Very, very good evening, Sunday the 23rd of March 2025. My name is Raja Mir. This is one of those Recusant 9 transmissions. These are all now free to air, so anyone and everyone is welcome. So the least I ask of people to do is like the broadcasts and, of course, like and share. So please do like and share. I genuinely cannot believe we've got this far as we have. Okay, serious stuff now. The broadcasts are free to air. We are struggling with our subscribers, even the free subscribers. The aspiration had been to get about 10 sign-ups to Redwall and the Rebel a day. We're doing well. We're getting 2 or 3. So please do, if you can, sign up, even if you're signing up for free. There is a method to all of this. We need numbers. We need numbers to secure the national inquiry, or even if we don't even get that far, to see it through to the end of this round of 5 local inquiries. As you've all seen by now, the only place in the country that actually genuinely critiques, analyses and leads a campaign is through me and here, in terms of the grooming gangs. Everyone else comes and goes, and when it's topical they run with it when it isn't. But they're missing, and I don't blame them. In the national media have their own issues, politicians have their own issues, and I know, Louise, I know you're trying hard, and I know so many of you are trying hard. The heavy lifting is done by us, all the research is done by us, and all the stuff in the background that leads to when the wave comes along, all of that is done as a consequence of people such as myself and through platforms such as this. And I genuinely don't enjoy promoting myself, but this is what I do. This is what I've been doing for the last 6 years, and this campaign would not be here if it had not been for my work and the small group of people who've been loyal to me through thick and thin, really. Thank you very, very much for the super chat. So please, if you find value and you're new and you're feeling generous, you've had a good week at work, maybe super chats are always welcome. But I urge people to sign up to Redwall and the Rabble. We're not there. But let's start somewhere. Let me start somewhere. There's a guy called Tom Crowther KC, did the work in Telford. And the work in Telford came about, the inquiry came about after the council in Telford were forced to move forward on it. And that followed, bizarrely, let me just find it. I don't know, I can't find it now. That's why. Here we go. It was a Sunday Mirror article that brought all of this to life in Telford, and I'll bring it up so you can see it. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. And you can see 10th of March 2018. Guy called Nick Summerlad, investigations editor with a woman called Geraldine McKelvey. Now, Geraldine McKelvey is, and I have had words, so I have very little time for her. But here we go. Britain's worst ever child grooming gang scandal exposed. Hundreds of young girls raped, beaten, sold for sex, and some even killed. That's right, some even killed. No ifs, no buts. Some of these kids were killed. Special Sunday Mirror investigation. Authorities failed to act over 40 years, 4 decades, despite repeated warnings to social workers, with up to 1,000 girls, some as young as 11, abused in Telford. That's right again, some as young as 11. And then they report on it. Up to 1,000 children could have suffered in Britain's worst known abuse scandal, where sex gangs targeted girls as young as 11. The rape hell of vulnerable young girls in one town, Telford, went on for a shocking 40 years. The Sunday Mirror can reveal. As many as 1,000 girls could have suffered at the merciless hands of perverts and torturers in Telford since the 1980s. Girls as young as 11 have been lured from their families to be drugged, beaten and raped in an epidemic that, say victims, is still ongoing. 3 people were murdered and 2 others died in tragedies linked to the scandal. And that was the MP at the time, Conservative, interestingly, Lucy Allen, who I have nothing but admiration for, and I'll get to that again later for those of you who are new. Despite similar high-profile cases in Rochdale and Rotherham, authorities in Telford repeatedly failed to stamp out a network of abusers. The Mirror's 18-month investigation reveals abuse on unprecedented levels we found. Social workers knew of abuse in the 1990s, but police took a decade to launch a probe. Council staff viewed abused and trafficked children as prostitutes instead of victims, according to previously unseen files. Authorities failed to keep details of abusers from Asian communities for fear of racism. That's right. Authorities failed to keep details of abusers from Asian communities for fear of racism. We later learn, of course, the Pakistani. Asian is unfair. Police failed to investigate one recent case 5 times until an MP intervened. Police failed to investigate one recent case 5 times. Remember Shabir Daddy Ahmed in Oldham? 9 times they let him go. One victim said cops tried to stop her finding out why her abusers had not been prosecuted because they feared she would talk to us. In Oldham, the police, Operation Sherwood, one of its first actions was to visit a survivor and warn her because she released her testimony. Nothing changed. The scale of the abuse uncovered in Telford, population 170,000, is feared to be the most brutal and long-running of all. The Rotherham toll was put at 1,500, but that was a community of 260,000. Telford Tory MP Lucy Allen has demanded a public inquiry and said our findings were extremely serious and shocking. She said, there must now be an independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation in Telford so that our community can have absolute confidence in the authorities. Specialist child abuse solicitor Dino Nicovelli of Bolt, Bird and Kemp said these children were treated as sexual commodities by men who inflicted despicable acts of abuse. The survivors deserve an inquiry. They need to know how abuse took place for so long and why so many perpetrators have never been brought to justice. Our investigators have spoken to 12 victims, most of them unconnected. So the victims were unconnected, most of them. Does that show the breadth of this organised network of Pakistani men? They accused more than 70 abusers and claim that violent rapes were still taking place months ago. So this is 2018. One 14-year-old groomed and abused after a phone number was sold to paedophiles said, I hated what was happening and my abusers made my skin crawl, but I was told that if I said a word to anyone, they'd come for my little sisters and tell my mum I was a prostitute. Night after night, I was forced to have sex with multiple men in disgusting takeaways and filthy houses. I must have been getting the morning after pill from a local clinic at least twice a week, but no one asked any questions. I fell pregnant twice, remember 14. I fell pregnant twice and had 2 abortions. Hours after my second termination, I was taken by one of my abusers to be raped by more men. Hours after my second termination, I was taken by one of my abusers to be raped by more men. The worst moment came just after my 16th birthday when I was drugged and gang raped by 5 men. Days later, the ringleader turned up at my house and told me he'd burn it down if I breathed a word of what had happened. Documents which will be passed to the Home Office reveals authorities knew of the horrors a decade before investigating and shows how they tried to hamper our probe. All of this is important. Some of you may have read this article that goes back to 2018. You may not have, but it's important for what I'm going to reveal soon. Thank you so much for the super chat. And I think by now you can all see this is what I do, and you'll see by the end of this transmission why it is they have so desperately tried to shut me down. We presented our findings to Professor Liz Kelly from the Child and Women Abuse Studies Unit at London Metropolitan University. She helped estimate the number of victims based on figures gathered by our investigators. Professor Kelly said, we are acting as if we didn't know about child sex abuse rings. We have an unfortunate capacity to choose to forget. Sheila Taylor of the NWG network worked on the Rotherham inquiry. She said the true scale of the Telford problem might never be known because many victims were unlikely to come forward. She said there is probably a whole cohort of young people that are not identified. We are good at identifying white girls, but are less able to identify young men, young people from ethnic minority backgrounds, from travelling communities, or with learning or other disabilities. A police investigation called Operation Chalice identified more than 100 potential victims abused between 2007 and 2009. Cops also said there could be as many as 200 perpetrators, but just 9 were caged, and the case was then closed. Today, our investigation reveals the authorities were told of the abuse epidemic more than a decade before Chalice. Our probe, backed by documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, found 2 predatory paedophiles began targeting girls from a local children's home in 1980. One of the abusers earned thousands a night for years trafficking girls around the country. You read that right, or you heard that right. Earned thousands a night for years trafficking girls around the country for sex with hundreds of men, according to one victim. In another case, a 14-year-old was groomed by an 18-year-old Asian man in 1985. Again, read Asian to mean Pakistani. After she had his baby, he passed her to friends to have sex with and allegedly rape her. I don't know why they put the word allegedly in there. The girl, now 47, says she reported her abuse to the council and school, but does not believe action was taken. She says her doctor said she was mentally ill and should take medication. So the doctor claimed this kid was mentally ill and should take medication. The vast majority of those targeted were young white girls, but teenagers from the Asian community also fell victim, so they claim. One report commissioned by local Telford and Wrecking Council in 2013 admitted from the late 1990s, professionals had concerns about the nature of some of the child sexual abuse cases presented to them. You can see the Telford abuse scandal back when the Daily Mirror, because at the time this was a Conservative council, remember, Conservative MP. Britain's worst child grooming gang scandal, whistleblowers silenced. Pregnant 6 times in 4 years, police ignored our pleas. But it blamed understanding and learning at that time and existing procedures. 2 separate investigations were launched at the same time as Operation Chalice after 2 victims named dozens more abusers. The victim in one case, groomed at 13, sold for sex and gang raped, said she pulled out of the investigation because she didn't feel she was being emotionally supported by the police. Nothing new. Another victim claims officers discouraged her from pursuing her request for evidence after she told them she was speaking to the Mirror. That's right. Another victim claims officers discouraged her from pursuing her request for evidence after she told them she was speaking to the press. That's Lucy Lowe. The entire country knows about Stephen Lawrence. The majority of the country does not know about Lucy Lowe. Why? I'd say because she was white and working class, and because of the nature of her killing wasn't from white racists, it was from a Pakistani racist. She did not die at 16 in a house fire, and I'm sure you'll understand why. People don't die in house fires like that. She was killed in 2000 along with her mother and sister after a 26-year-old abuser, Azhar Ali Mahmood, set fire to their house. Would you call that a murder? She didn't die, she was murdered. A mother and 4 girls. Kabi Mahmood targeted Lucy in 1997 and she was just 14 when she gave birth to his daughter. Even here the Mirror are being evasive of the truth. I think my understanding from the court papers I read was she was 12 when he started targeting her. She was 14 when she gave birth to his daughter. He was jailed for murdering Lucy, her mum Eileen, and 17-year-old sister Sarah. But he was never arrested nor charged in connection with any child sex crimes over his illegal relationship with the schoolgirl. It wasn't a relationship. It's called grooming and gang rape. Lucy's death was used as a warning to other girls, according to victims. One drugged and gang raped by 9 men 2 years later said the threats drove her to attempt suicide. She said, "I was scared my family would die like Lucy's. I thought they'd only be safe if I killed myself." In 2002, 13-year-old Becky Watson died in a car accident that was reported at the time as a prank. That's Vicky Round, abused by a gang who got her hooked on crack cocaine aged 12 and on heroin by 14. Remember, I told you, there's a clear overlap between these filthy, barbaric Pakistani men with heroin dealing as well as trafficking children. The Mirror investigation found she suffered 2 years of abuse by an Asian grooming gang, Pakistani grooming gang, which began when she was just 11. That's this young lady here, Becky Watson, 13. From the age of 11, 2 years of abuse. Tragic diaries obtained by the Mirror reveal her torment of being made to sleep around. Her mum, Torrin Watson, said she repeatedly told the police that Becky was being abused and even gave them a list of suspects. She told the Sunday Mirror, "Girls like Becky were treated like criminals. I was crying out for help, but it felt like I had nowhere to turn. If Becky's abuse had been properly investigated by the authorities, more girls could have been saved from going through this hell." Vicky Round, a friend of Becky's, was abused by the same gang who got her hooked on crack cocaine aged 12 and on heroin by 14. She died aged 20 of a drugs incident, and her sister Emma told us, "I have no doubt Vicky would still be here if she hadn't been so badly abused. Yet the people who made her life hell still walk the streets." Then it goes on to give a timeline. And if you believe vermin police officers like this, then you're a better person than I am. Martin Evans, Assistant Chief Constable for West Mercia Police, said, "We are aware of the information you have provided. If you have faith in these men, you're better than I am." Police and local authority chiefs yesterday said all reports of child sex exploitation were taken extremely seriously. According to the police, tackling such horrific offences is the #1 priority for police in Telford, and we have not only increased officers' numbers to tackle this type of offending, but use all of our resources and technology available. I can't even be bothered to read any more of that shit off him. And some idiot from the council, a spokesperson. They're always unnamed, these spokespersons, aren't they? Child sexual exploitation is a vile, evil crime. It's an issue right across the UK and has been for a long time. So it's okay. It's happening everywhere else. It's okay. Telford will be covered by the National CSE review. We welcome this, of course. That national review that those Labour Party supporting vermin on social media keep making reference to, the ICSA review, it dropped Telford. It refused to investigate Telford. No one can explain to me why it refused to investigate Telford. Yeah, I think that's what they should be called. You're right. Not a spokesman for the council, a spokesperson for the rape gangs. As a consequence of Telford being dropped and the outrage and Lucy Allen's relentless campaigning, the MP, who was pushing for a national inquiry, a public inquiry, the Conservative government at the time bodged it, and the council then commissioned their own local inquiry. And they brought in Tom Crowther. And they now claim the Telford inquiry was a resounding success. It was a massive cover-up. And I'll explain why. In fact, I don't need to explain why. I want you to listen to this.
And they said to me, spoke to me in Telford, and they said to me, "I'm ashamed of..." Didn't speak up. People did come and say, "Yes, I got this wrong." People very senior in social services say,
in Oldham. I want to talk to Tom.
Spoke to me in Telford, and they said to me, "I'm ashamed I didn't speak up." People did come and say, "Yes, I got this wrong." People very senior in social services say, "We made mistakes." I had police officers who were basically crying in interviews because of what they'd got wrong before. People wanted to admit and accept what had gone wrong and what they'd done wrong. In Telford, we had maybe 3 or 4 people who declined to give evidence, mostly saying that they couldn't remember at 20, 30 years distance. That might well have been right. And if you think about it, if somebody says that, even an inquiry with compulsion powers just brings somebody there who will say again, "I can't remember." I had the advantage in Telford that I was able to name the people who didn't cooperate, and people can draw their own conclusions from that failure to cooperate. So it's not as if people can escape some sort of scrutiny, even in a local inquiry.
But isn't one of the questions about child sexual exploitation in this context about the fact that, you know, potentially council employees knew about it, social services knew about it, police knew about it, and that either they didn't feel able to or they just didn't speak up? And therefore, if those people are able to say, "You know what, I don't remember, I don't want to get involved," it will only fuel this idea that there is a cover-up and we're not getting to the bottom of what is a huge problem.
But you know what? People in all those categories spoke to me in Telford, and they said to me, "I'm ashamed I didn't speak up." People did come and...
You'll have to ignore the advert, I'm afraid. I recorded it and the advert came up, but it won't be on long.
Say, "Yes, I got this wrong." People very senior in social services say, "We made mistakes." I had police officers who were basically crying in interviews what they'd got wrong before. People wanted to admit and accept what had gone wrong and what they'd done wrong.
So essentially, we sort of have to take it on faith a little bit that this local system is going to work. I mean, you are going to be providing the framework. Is there something that you can put in place or something you can help people with, whereby if they find they're coming up against lots of barriers where people won't give evidence or they say they don't remember, that they can do something about it? Is there a backstop?
You can't do anything ever against people who say they can't remember, but you can very carefully set out why people won't give evidence, which is what I did in the Telford report. And then people can draw their own conclusions. But I have to say again, I did not come across in Telford any sense of cover-up or any sense of people not wanting to tell the truth. There was an overwhelming sense that people knew it had been badly handled and people wanted to make amends for that. People actually did want to come and accept that things had gone wrong. I mean, this was, I suspect, yes, I think in the Times today, Baroness Faulkner from the EHRC has talked about well-meaning, misguided anti-racism. And there was certainly an element of that, shutting down certain complaints. People in the 80s and 90s, I grew up then, I remember what it's like. There was a feeling that to make any criticism of the behaviour of a non-white person was to be racist, even when you were talking about crime, which was plainly nonsense. But that was a feeling that was abroad there. But the real problem back then was that exploitation was not being regarded as crime, not only by police, not only by social services, but by members of the public who were turning a blind eye to this and seeing these girls and what was happening to them as bad life choices rather than seeing them as victims of crime.
And do you believe that that's changed now?
Certainly in Telford, there's a mechanism for reporting. Teachers were told that they were being racist by raising complaints in the 90s. Now there's in place a network for teachers to report any concerns, and they feel confident in doing so. Have we changed as a society? I think we have.
Yeah. But the other issue that people raise is cost. I believe that Telford cost around £8 million to complete. The government has put
I can say now that's not a figure I recognise. It was millions, but 8 is way north of the mark.
Can you give us an idea of how much? Because what I was going to say to you was the government has put aside £5 million for 4 fresh local inquiries, which if Telford alone cost 8, which obviously you're saying it didn't, it clearly won't be enough. If it was in the millions, just by those calculations, £5 million isn't going to be enough. I mean, what was the cost of Telford in the end?
It was roughly 5.
Okay, so £5 million for Telford, but the government's offering £5 million for 4 fresh local inquiries. Do you have confidence that's going to be enough to cover it?
I think having been in Telford, I can see where there can be savings made. I think you can have an inquiry that's more limited in terms of scope. There are certain things we did in Telford, which was an absolute gold standard inquiry, which you wouldn't need to do in every town.
But don't you think those... Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
don't you think that those local people might want a gold standard inquiry? It seems like a strange position to start from.
Well, for example, we looked in real detail into police intelligence sharing. Now, that's something that could be taken from Telford and applied because it's national policy across the piece. That work is done. So we wouldn't need to look at that. What we need to look at in any local inquiry is children's services response and police response. That's what's crucial, and it can be focused on that.
And how long do you think these would take? I think Telford took around 3 years.
Took around 3. I think we were delayed by COVID a little bit. I think 18 months, 2 years is realistic if you're going to do a proper job and a deep dive, granular investigation on those features that I've talked about, police and social services response.
And just finally, I mean, we are having a review done by Louise Casey. It's a rapid review of the existing evidence. So important to make clear, it's not a fact-finding mission. It's not about looking into, evidence that exists right now. It's about things that we already know. And it will be within 3 months, the report from that. Do you think that's a good step by the government? And ultimately, some people are saying it may well lead to a national inquiry in the end anyway, because if it does discover that there's a pattern of behaviour and bigger questions, that might be where we go. Do you think that in the end, that national inquiry might be the next logical step?
Well, I don't know more than anyone else does about that. But what I can say is there's a real difference between the national review that's proposed, any subsequent national inquiry there might be, and the sort of local inquiry that I chair. If you're looking at prevalence amongst a racial group of a certain type of offending, cultural drivers, that sort of thing, a local inquiry cannot deal with that. But if you're looking at what went wrong in a town, Equally, a national inquiry cannot deal with that. You need the sort of detail that I was able to go into in Telford, which would not be possible with a national inquiry, just in terms of scope.
What's the most important thing that will come out of these, do you hope? What do you think in the end, after the 2-year period when we've had these 4 other inquiries, what do you think those local towns, those local people will get out of it?
Well, if they've got what Telford's got out of it, they'll have in place a robust system for reporting CSC, a robust system where people know that they can have the confidence to say something is wrong if they see it, and it'll be dealt with properly. And what's more, in Telford, we have the confidence of the survivors that they have made a difference to the safety of kids now and tomorrow in Telford. And it is the survivors who've made the difference. It's they who pushed for the inquiry. It's they who've been involved in implementation of my recommendations. And survivors have to be at the heart of these local inquiries. That's what gives them legitimacy.
Do you think there should be more than 4? Some people say there are 50 towns that are affected.
I think it's up to individual towns to decide what they want.
But you would support towns if they wanted to do this, to try and get this to happen?
Absolutely.
I've got another interview of his to play, but I'll play that in a bit. I read all that to you from the Daily Mirror, Sunday Mirror investigation that led to Telford initially being meant to be part of the X investigation. It wasn't, and the council then were forced to launch their own inquiry, and this man came in. He wrote a 4-volume report. I've read the 4-volume report. I'm currently rereading the 4-volume report. Each volume is about 300 pages. He spent 3 years, and you saw what led to having that inquiry be launched, and he has the audacity, and I don't care who he is. If we are now up against the KC, then we are now up against the KC. We've been up against some of the most powerful politicians in this country, some of the most powerful Pakistani gangsters in this country, some jihadists and Islamists, the national media. Do you think I give a fuck that a KC now comes along? I don't, and my apologies for swearing. But he had the audacity, Tom Crowther, in that interview, and you heard him, had the audacity to say he did not find any sense of a cover-up in Telford, or any sense of people not telling the truth. And he stood by it because that particular clip was edited by the Times and put on X, and he shared it. You'll find it. I'll play that bit. Let me just find it. Give me 1 second.
Any sense of that people knew it.
Here we go.
I did not come across in Telford any sense of cover-up or any sense of people not wanting to tell the truth. There was
I did not come across in Telford any sense of a cover-up or any sense of people not wanting to tell the truth. His report is full of details of cover-ups, lies, misdirections. But be honest with me, of the 300 of you watching, how many had read the Sunday Mirror article? How many of you understood the sequence that led to the Telford inquiry? And how many of you have read the hundreds of pages of the reports? This is what the system does. This is what the establishment does. It buries it in bureaucracy. And it just moves on. And it recreates a narrative where he's gone on Times Radio, national radio, and has the audacity to say he did not find or come across any sense of a cover-up. And then in his interview, where is his sympathy? His sympathy is with the people who've got caught. The police officers crying you've got caught, protecting Pakistani rape gangs. His attitude towards people who can't remember, well, you can't do anything about it. Of course you can. You can put in front of them the evidence, the documents of the meetings where they were, where decisions were made. Of course, the local inquiry can't get to those documents. In the same way it can't compel witnesses, it can't go after the evidence. He's blasé about people who didn't give evidence. Well, you can make your own mind up. No. People cannot escape scrutiny. No. What we want is people not to escape accountability. Massive difference. Well-meaning anti-racism. What on earth is well-meaning anti-racism? Well, he describes it. Ignore crimes that are committed by ethnics and whites. I am a trained anti-racist. That is not anti-racism. That is selling little white girls. And you heard me read what that meant for some of these children as young as 11. And he claims in this interview that the real problem was that exploitation was not regarded as a crime. You fucking wanker. The real problem is that exploitation is not regarded as a crime. No, the real problem is that these men believed that they could do this to these children. That is the real problem. And the culture that had allowed this to happen for decades across the country, because these girls were trafficked across the country. That is the real problem, is that these Pakistani men were above the law. He hides behind the survivors. I worked in counter-terrorism for a long time. There are those who are radicalized who have a place in shaping the responses, but they do not lead the responses. You do not allow those who've been in a mental hospital to be in charge of an asylum. And in this setting, just because you're a survivor does not mean you're the best person or the only person who should be involved. Did he heck? He doesn't know what's hit him, Denise. This establishment stooge has no idea of what we are going to do to him. We are not Telford or Rotherham or Rochdale. We have an organised political community campaign, and he will not be allowed to do here what he has done in Telford and now claim he did not come across any sense of a cover-up. The journalist, to her credit, holds him to account a number of times. Should we not deserve the same gold standard? And he backpedaled. He was evasive with how much Telford cost until she pinned him down. And even then he said in the region of 5. And he's admitted it'll take at least 2 years, or in the region of 2 years. And we know 5 million for 5 is about 1 million for Oldham. No wonder the council are rubbing their hands in glee. No wonder Arood Shah is out passenger in a Bentley with her arm out the window, giving it large, whilst the heroin dealing Irish Shimmy is driving her around the streets of Oldham. No wonder Andy Burnham's getting brave. We can fight this. We must fight this. And by now you know no one else is going to fight this. Or at the very least lead this fight. This is why they've repeatedly tried to put me in prison. Because I can pull the evidence from one place, connect it to the evidence from another, and communicate it to you so you can see yourself what is going on. Because those of you who followed me from the beginning will always tell you, I do not tell you what to think. I trust you to be able to think for yourselves. I can educate you, I can support you, but in the end, you can make your own mind up. And I think by now you have made your mind up as to what Tom Crowther is and what his role will be. We have to keep going until the first of his inquiries is complete. Fight, expose, critique it all the time whilst he's conducting it. And then when he tries to present it, in the same way Amanda Chadditt and Andy Burnham tried to present it, who was the person who ripped it to pieces? Who, when everyone else said, no, it's over, stayed the course? We did. And it falls to us to do the same again, not for the sake of Oldham, but for the sake of the entire United Kingdom. And so I plead with you yet again, for the love of God, what is stopping you people from signing up to a webpage so that when I'm fighting for you, they know I have numbers behind me? What on earth is stopping you? It's not just the left, mate. The government at the time were the Conservatives. Lucy Allen screamed and shouted and pleaded for a public inquiry. The Conservatives refused one because the Prime Minister at the time, was it Boris Johnson, made reference to justice for working class white girls as spiffing money up a wall. I challenged Tom Crowther at the time on X. Here, see it yourself. He responded to me. He knows full well who I am. You can see 6th of January 2025. He put this interview up on Talk, and I'll play the interview in a minute. You're aware that a local investigation has already taken place and it has been exposed as a cover-up, and that the authors of this assurance review have abandoned their roles? ? This is why we forced Oldham Council to write to the government. As a KC, I'm surprised you do not know this, some words to that effect. Dealt with how to commission it properly, independent local inquiry, not a review, so it differentiates between a review and an inquiry. And the disadvantages of statutory inquiry in this context, in the full interview, first 3 minutes or so here. He's trying to educate me. Prick now, mate. Because if you think this through, and this isn't just about Oldham, this is a national thing. Who's most at risk from these Pakistani gangsters? Some anonymous person who signs up to a webpage that they would have no idea who they are? Someone who anonymously perhaps pays me £3 a month or sends me a coffee via PayPal? No. There's only one person these fuckers are coming after, and that's me. Listen to this. That way. Here we go.
In Oldham, I want to talk to Tom Crowther now, who's a King's Counsel. He was the chairman of the Telford Child Sexual Exploitation Inquiry. Tom, good evening to you. Do you think there should be a similar inquiry in Oldham, and if so, why?
If I lived in Oldham, I'd want an inquiry. And I'd want one similar to Telford, but that doesn't mean I'd want a statutory public inquiry set up by the government.
Why not?
It's because that sort of high-level inquiry looks at government failings at government level. We're looking at local authority failings. If I lived in Oldham, I'd want to know what's gone wrong and has it been fixed. And that means local social services department, local children's services, local police. Now, my inquiry in Telford, although the Survivors Committee, which was a pressure group that existed from about 2014 onwards and pushed for a statutory public inquiry, and did the local MP, Tory, settled ultimately, because the Tory government wouldn't have it, for a local inquiry set up, funded by Telford itself, but completely arm's length. And that's what we did. And the advantages of that sort of inquiry are, first, speed. We reported in 3 years, whereas the national inquiry took something like 7. And I gave 47 recommendations. Alexis Jay's national child sexual abuse inquiry gave 20. Of my 47, 43 have been implemented. Alexis Jay's inquiry, none have been implemented in the last 3 years. It's because I was able to look at the local problem and offer local solutions.
When you were looking at that local...
What Oldham needs.
Okay. Tom, when you were looking at that local problem, critical, how difficult, how dispassionate did you have to be to say, you know, you're looking locally in Telford, you're talking about people who are often in senior positions locally. How sensitive was that? How sensitive did you need to be? And was there any pressure on you to be, you know, in regard to individuals, in regard to communities, or did you just say, look, I'm just going to tell it like I see it because that's the right thing to do?
And that's the point. The contract, because it's a contract that's set up between the council and the law firm, who's the commissioning body, said I was going to set the terms of inquiry, I was going to set the terms of reference, and they were going to have to comply with what I wanted. The only advantage of a statutory public inquiry is that sort of inquiry can force witnesses to come. But you know what? The very few witnesses who didn't come and talk to me, well, they ran the risk that they were going to be named. And
well,
some
yes,
were,
indeed, and people could draw their own conclusions from that. I wonder.
Can I say one other thing?
Go for it.
One other thing, Peter? And it's about Lewis said about hearing survivors' voices. I was able, in a non-statutory inquiry, to say I will, or representatives of the law firm will go to people's houses. We'll hear your account over tea and biscuits. It doesn't look anything like a court. A statutory inquiry looks like a court, and it dissuades
what did you hear,
from giving
Tom?
their evidence. What
did you hear? Tell us about what happened in Telford. Just tell people who may not be familiar with your inquiry. You were the chairman, let's remember, of the Telford Child Exploitation Inquiry, because what we're hearing, and I know you heard some of the interview there with Lewis Quigg, some of what we're hearing there must seem eerily familiar to you in terms of what is actually going on and what the resistance is, both locally and nationally, to it being exposed.
Yep, it's absolutely appalling that this is still going on. When my inquiry reported in 2022, I said in interviews like this, never assume it can't happen here. Don't assume it's just the pariah towns. Every town should be looking at what's going on underneath the surface. And in Telford, we had 30, 40 years of children being abused. And fundamentally, the failing was those children not being listened to, those children being dismissed, discounted, disregarded as feral or making bad life choices. That was the real problem in Telford over decades. And it was a societal problem.
Tell us some of the inconvenient truths that you were talking about. You talk about it being a societal problem. Is it a racial problem? Is it a faith problem?
Well, certainly there were teachers, there were police officers who were told not to raise this issue because it would cause problems with racial coherence. Yeah, absolutely. And some were told in terms, you're racist to raise it. Now, I'm talking about the 1990s, and I think things have changed. But that was an issue.
Have things changed now? Are things better now?
Telford has certainly changed. I mean, I went back for a 2-year review this year, and the approach is completely different. Let me tell you what I spoke about the Survivors Committee early on. They've rather morphed into now called independent lived experience consultants, and the council has brought them on board. And every part of council and police response to child sexual exploitation is informed by the experiences of these women who've done a tremendous job. I mean, let me quote one of them, if you'll allow me to.
Go ahead,
one of them on
please do.
One of them on Twitter, Holly Archer. Telford inquiry has been incredibly positive. Local survivor-led non-statutory inquiries are the way forward. No more massive statutory inquiries with generalised recommendations. And that's a woman who's a survivor herself. That's a woman who in 2016 was desperate for a public statutory inquiry because that process is seen as the gold standard. But for this issue, you don't need something like the post office or Afghanistan or COVID inquiry. You need local, granular investigation, and you need targeted recommendations.
Tom, I recognise that it's 5:15 in the evening, and we know that there will be all sorts of people, including children, listening. But just with that in mind, Tom, can you just tell us a little bit about what really shocked you about what you learned? Because we are almost immune, I think, or desensitised perhaps to some of this. But some of the things that you will have uncovered, some of the things that we know have happened and continue to happen elsewhere, perhaps even in Oldham today as we speak, are really shocking.
Children being treated as commodities, children being traded between men, groups of men raping individual children, children arriving in taxis at school, having been taken to local beauty spots to be sexually exploited, to be raped, let's be honest about it, going on all the time. Parents, youth workers, teachers complaining, being ignored. And in the end, in Telford, it came down to a few youth workers, a few parents, and a few police officers who said no more. And they fought and fought and fought. And in the end, they had a prosecution, one of the very first, and I pay tribute to them.
It's been fascinating talking to you, Tom. Thank you. I've learned a lot from this interview, and I definitely want to talk to you on a future occasion. Tom Crowther there, who is a King's Counsel senior lawyer, who was chairman of the Telford Child Sexual Exploitation Inquiry.
In the end, in Oldham, it was a handful of us who refused to be smeared, to be harassed, to be criminalised, who forced this. It wasn't the survivors. Let's be very clear. It wasn't the survivors that forced this. And I speak to survivors. And I have little time for a small group of survivors who are working hand in glove with the council. No doubt, having gone to Telford and seen how Telford Council has essentially hired a bunch of survivors as consultants, they can see a similar role maybe for themselves. He talks about wanting to focus on putting support mechanisms around the agencies. Lessons learned, what's changed now? He talks about the focus on survivors and hearing their testimony. What he doesn't talk about, what he never talks about, is holding to account those who failed. Holding to account those who were complicit in the cover-up. And what he never talks about, and in fact he claims the local inquiry can't get to that. They use the posh term now. It's called cultural drivers. Posh political talk for Pakistani rapists looking upon working class white girls as dirt, and they deserve it. And they use the religious beliefs also to legitimise the gang rape of white children. In the world I come from, yes, you've got the victims and you've got the agencies who failed them. Yes, you've got that. But you've also got the underlying belief systems of the demographic group that are responsible for the systematic grooming and gang rape of children. And you've also got on the other end the individuals, the politicians, the police officers, whoever, who knew and helped cover it up. And no, it doesn't talk about votes either, because that's the connection, isn't it? The trading. And you can see yourself, you heard it yourself, in two separate interviews now. One, he says there was no cover-up, and in this one, he's making reference to cover-ups, isn't he? Or have I, is my English, I know it's not my first language, so you'll have to forgive me. Did I hear him wrong? He's making reference to cover-ups here, isn't he? Yeah, there's all of that, isn't there? About the middle class white, the prejudice towards working class kids. Watch what I do. Watch what I do to this man. His career will be finished. He will rue the day he ever thought he could say that there was no cover-up, or he came no sense of a cover-up in Telford, and that he can speak on behalf of the people of my town as to what we want, which is a local inquiry commissioned by the council, pressured by the MP, with a bunch of Pakistani gangsters hanging off Arood Shah's arm, maybe showing him around. No. Remember, the council has already written to the Home Office saying we don't want this. We forced that. We've not got a response yet from the Home Office, but they're carrying on as though that letter hadn't gone. And in many ways, that letter hasn't gone because the chief executive who sent that letter didn't even write a letter. She just copied and pasted the motion. And then, knowing all of that, Dave Arnott, the Conservative at the time, sat in a council meeting, appointments committee, and appointed her as chief executive. This is why I want to sometimes pull my hair out and give up and say, there's no point. Because the people we support back, once they get in positions of power, time after time after time, has stabbed us in the back and become members of the establishment. What should happen now as a direct consequence of this is the opposition council leaders should issue immediate statements raising concerns. Instead, the Conservative leader is now Max Wood. This is a man who about 18 months ago got in trouble in Upper Mill. He went out with the other councillor's daughter, caused havoc in the village of Upper Mill, got drunk, and what was his strap line to people who objected to his behaviour? Do you know who I am? You've got Howard Sykes, self-declared friend of Cyril Smith, and also a friend of Rod Blythe, a councillor we exposed has been convicted for a child sex offender. The council kept it hidden. The independents we put in the council chamber, they're either incapable of doing this sort of work, or they've joined with Arud Shah and the Labour Party. So no one's going to challenge him. No one's going to challenge this, and Operation Cover-Up will commence. No evidence of a cover-up. So we're speaking from the same hymn sheet as such. Let me confirm with you the 15 different mechanisms that constitute a cover-up. Yes, there are 15. As far as I'm aware, there are 15. I'll go through that. If you're with me for a bit longer, I'll do a little bit of education with you. I'll go through the 15. If you're finding value, please like, please share. Please, if you can, support me with a super chat. Maybe buy me a coffee. Or better still, sign up to Red Wall and the Rabble. I've got the screen open next to me. Since we began this evening, not a single sign up. And since we began this evening, not a single coffee of any form or anything like that. We supported councillors Markins and Lisa Nafesy to get elected as Shaw Independents. Not long after getting elected, Markins turned and started abusing me. He reported me to the police and had me investigated for electoral fraud. It was false, it was malicious. Not a single person in Shaw spoke up for me. Not a single person in Shaw wrote to the council and complained to the Standards Committee that Markins should not be using his official role as a councillor this way, where he used Oldham Council letterhead and published it online. Not one of you did. Hinds then took a motion to the council to have me investigated for millions of pounds worth of fraud and saying I was responsible for safeguarding failures. They passed that motion to write to the government, and the government asked them, well, have you got any evidence? Send it us. They didn't. It was malicious, it was fabricated, it was designed to smear me, to attack me. Not a single one of you from Shaw supported me. Let's hear the truth now. Not one of you. Not one of you challenged him. Not one of you wrote to the council. These attacks started on me after I'd been cleared for a series of malicious charges by Greater Manchester Police and the CPS in partnership with Oldham Council. How many of you from Shaw came and sat by me? Who also was dragged from one courtroom to another. So no. Fight your own battles. What constitutes a cover-up? I went and did this piece of work after Tom Crowther said there was no evidence of a cover-up. He found no cover-up in Telford. And it reminded me of Amanda Chadderton standing at the front of that press release with Andy Burnham and his experts. Again, they're saying no evidence of a cover-up. So let's be very clear on what a cover-up actually is. I think that should be the starting point. And this is what I have as a cover-up. And there's 15 of them. 15 different ways. One is the deliberate suppression of reports. So authorities repeatedly dismiss, downgrade, or fail to properly record warnings about problems or patterns of abuse. So that's the first way a cover-up takes place. The deliberate suppression of reports. 2, the institutional silencing of whistleblowers. So what that is professionals who attempt to escalate concerns, face career repercussions, and are discouraged from pursuing cases. Crowther made reference to that himself. You heard him. 3, the strategic non-recording of evidence. Reports of abuse are frequently left unrecorded or improperly categorized to prevent the establishment of patterns. That's why they do it. It's to prevent the establishment of patterns. The strategic non-recording of evidence. 4. The compartmentalizing is that a word? Of intelligence. The entire 5 local inquiries is that, the compartmentalizing intelligence. So what happens is critical information is deliberately kept isolated between agencies, preventing the formation of a comprehensive picture. It's not done by accident, it's done through intent. Again, Telford was full of that, Oldham's full of that, Rochdale's full of that, they're all full of that. The compartmentalization of intelligence. 5. Victim reclassification. Labeling victims with terms that diminish their victimhood status to avoid mandatory responses. Lifestyle choices. Have you heard that before? Let's carry on with the victims. Calculated victim discrediting. Authorities systematically undermine victim testimonies by questioning their credibility and character. Yeah, these is how, and I'm going through them systematically, you can see of what actually the definition of a cover-up is. 7. Premature termination of investigations. So inquiries are routinely closed before completion despite substantial evidence. Operation Augusta in Manchester, the police shut down a grooming gang of 97 members and the minutes have gone missing. The premature termination of investigations also took place in Telford. 8. What's known as resource diversion. I'd argue that the inquiries themselves are that. They've been set up to fail. Fact, they've not got the resources they need. Deliberate redirecting of resources away from investigating serious cases. Evidence after evidence of that. Political sensitivity shields. Using fear of cultural or political insensitivity as a pretext to avoid pursuing certain cases. He used it. He made reference to it. 10. Convenient institutional amnesia. Key figures claiming memory lapses regarding critical decisions when finally called to account. He made reference to it himself, didn't he? 11. On the back of that, refusal to testify. Senior officials declining to give evidence to subsequent investigations, effectively obstructing justice. Number 12. Minimization of culpability. Authorities downplay the severity of failures or deflect responsibilities onto others. Empty apologies without accountability. Offering hollow expressions of regret without concrete consequences for those responsible. It's happened everywhere, hasn't it? Obstruction of reform efforts. Resisting the implementation of changes that would prevent future abuses and expose past failures. Well, how many times did Oldham Council block? Yes, Tony. Jabbar has no recollection of giving Daddy a reference. And what we're seeing in action, deflection through procedure. Using bureaucratic processes and procedural technicalities to delay or prevent proper investigations. And Crowther himself has admitted this one in Oldham will take 2 years. I reckon it'll take more. So there you have the 15 ways in which you identify a cover-up. These are the mechanisms. It isn't just hiding the truth. I've gone down to the specifics. I'll share this, by the way. Of course, I'll print this. I'll share this. I'll share it via Red Wall and a Rabble so people can see it themselves. If I've got the time or the inclination, I might even cross-reference all 15 with the report in Telford and the report in Andy Burnham's Assurance Review to demonstrate cover-ups in action. My apologies for swearing this evening. He made me extremely angry because he knows, a King's Counsel knows what exactly quantifies a cover-up. He will know what I've set out as the 15 markers. In fact, he probably has more markers. Don't say this to scare you. These people will succeed if we don't organise, if we don't mobilise, and we don't find the courage to do what's right. To those of you in Oldham, I urge you to get yourself politically organised and hold the councillors you've elected responsible. I'll go away and I'll come back on, I think I'll come back on Tuesday and I'll do something specifically in Oldham for you. I sense it, I feel it, I'll do something specifically in Oldham for you. That's no problem. If anything, my anger is that these people tried to kill me. These people tried to put me in prison. These people tried to have me commit suicide by claiming I was a child abuser. And so few people stood by me. And reflecting on that over the fullness of time, it's not angry, it upsets me. That I risked what I risked, and when idiots like Mark Ince came after me, you couldn't even speak up for me. He's going to come to Oldham. I need to draw my strength, gather myself. Those of you who are with me need to be with me. Those of you who can convince to come and stand alongside us need to do so. Our numbers desperately need to grow, because they will only take us seriously if we have numbers. And I keep saying this because I know this to be true. They'll only take us seriously if we have numbers. And as a consequence of this evening's transmission, we have one new subscriber to Redwall and Rabble. And on that, I'll bid you all good night. I'll come back on Tuesday and do something for Oldham. Take care.